Today's video will discuss the Bakufu, also known as the military government in medieval Japan. When we think of medieval Japan, we tend to equate the shogun with the emperor, but in reality the shogun often held the true political power, while the emperor served more as a ceremonial figure. I'll try to keep this video ultimately pretty simple and by avoiding using too many Japanese names that may confuse viewers. When I was reading up for this video, it was often hard to keep track of everyone, so I hope this serves just as like a basic introduction without sacrificing too many of the details. We're going to start with a brief prelude, giving some basic background, and then from there I'll delve into the three main Japanese shogunates, outlining their rise, fall, and achievements. As always, I hope you enjoy the video, and feel free to let me know what you think in the comments below. For nearly 7 centuries, the true rulers were the shoguns, and their governments were known as Bakufu. But what's a shogun, and what differentiates them from an emperor, king, dictator, etc.? A shogun has two main qualities. 1. He's the hereditary military leader of Japan. The title was always held by men from powerful warrior clans, and the position was tied to like a patriarchal samurai system. This didn't prevent women from playing some sort of role. Rarely, like women, particularly the mothers or grandmothers of other shoguns, held heavy influence as regents. So although they did have like significant control, they couldn't really be granted the shogun title because they were a woman. And quality number 2 of what makes a shogun, they were the de facto ruler of Japan. So Japan was always ruled by an emperor in theory, but starting in the late 12th century, emperors gradually lost their direct political power. Instead, military families rose, claiming authority to govern in the emperor's name. The emperor's role was reduced to something more of a ceremonial role, while the shogun became the actual ruler and enforcer of the will in Japan. And the first to do this was Minamoto Yoritomo, who established the first shogunate, the Kamakura Bakufu. Let's paint a quick picture of the years leading up to the shogunate, before Yoritomo was officially given the title of shogun. So the Heian period preceded the year 1185 and was fundamentally flawed. In my opinion, many of its faults led to its collapse, and it led to the ascent of the shogunate. Remember when I said that the emperor lost power under the shogunate? Well, it's only because it had power to begin with before. Let's go over how their policies failed them and how the Japanese monarchy lost power and influence on the island. Firstly, the government was declining economically. The state's income decreased significantly when they started giving tax exemptions out more regularly. They were called shoin and were given out to nobles and temples, pretty much anyone of significance who was allegiant. So just consider the shoin as tax exemptions pretty much, which also decreased Kyoto's control in that particular region. However, this shoin policy decreased Kyoto's prestige and power. But how? It played a role by simultaneously increasing the regional power while decreasing imperial power. Since nobles were able to keep most of the resources on hand, they increased their personal fortune while decreasing the income of the state. Secondly, the shogun were often outside the reach of the imperial government, so these more autonomous landholders now needed warriors to defend their properties. They couldn't just rely on the government at the time. These circumstances helped the samurai class emerge out of this demand for protection, among other factors. They served the temples, provide protection, and naturally strengthen the regional areas. If we paint a picture of this, with all this in mind, Japan's centrality is diminishing, leading to the growth of private estates and the decentralization of power. It's similar to the way feudalism developed in medieval Europe, where local lords and warriors gained influence as kings lost control. Everything is regional, nothing is united. It was only under these conditions that Minamoto no Yoritomo rose to prominence. Remember, he was the guy that was responsible for the Japanese shogunate in 1185. Yoritomo was the head of the Minamoto clan and the leading figure of the rising samurai class. These weak imperial authority and growth of his class paved the way for his ascent and the eventual creation of the shogunate. After gaining recognition as the most powerful military leader in 1185, Yoritomo was given the title of shogun from the emperor in 1192. Rather than ruling from Kyoto, he set up his own government base in Kamakura, about 270 miles away, establishing a warrior-based administration independent from the imperial court. This system came to be known as Bakufu and became the foundation of military rule in Japan for the next 700 years. The Kamakura Bakufu created the first true warrior government in Japanese history. Land was granted to vassals in exchange for loyalty and military service, laying the foundation for Japan's feudal system. The emperor remained a symbolic authority since he was deemed divine, but the Bakufu handled law, administration, military affairs, The Kamakura period was marked by one of Japan's most dramatic episodes in the Mongol invasions. In the late 1200s, Kublai Khan sent massive fleets to conquer Japan, 2 of them. The invasion was not stopped by the Japanese warriors, but rather the weather, as typhoons destroyed the Mongol fleet. But victories such as this actually strengthened the prestige of the Bakufu. However, these feelings wouldn't last forever. Despite the victory against the Mongols and a strong feudal order, the Kamakura government also had its limitations of a warrior regime. There was financial strain from maintaining defenses, combined with tensions between the Bakufu and the imperial court, eventually weakening its control. Things especially made a turn in the 1330s when the Japanese emperor launched a rebellion in an attempt to seize all political power from the shogun. After some setbacks, Emperor Go-Daigo was successful, at least in the short term, in the Kemu Restoration, where he gained power. However, he was too harsh on the samurai when he came back, and some started to rebel against him. It would only be a few years later when Ashikaga Takauji captured Kyoto and started the second Bakufu in Shogunate, the Ashikaga, also known as the Muromachi Bakufu. Ashikaga Takauji establishes government in Kyoto's Muromachi district, giving this era its name. The Ashikaga Bakufu was weaker than its predecessor, and although it controlled Kyoto, much of the countryside was dominated by powerful regional warlords known as daimyo. The Bakufu often struggled to enforce its authority beyond the capital. Still, this period produced some of Japan's most iconic cultural achievements. No theater was developed, tea ceremonies, rituals, and Zen Buddhism, which influenced architecture, gardens, and painting. Politically, however, the Ashikaga Bakufu faced endless turmoil. Rival branches of the imperial family sparked the era of the northern and southern courts. Later, the Onin War, beginning in 1467, put Japan into a century of chaos known as the Sengoku period. It's also known as the Age of Warring States, much like China. During this time, the authority of the shogun was nearly meaningless, and the daimyo fought each other for dominance. It was out of this turmoil that a new and stronger Bakufu would eventually emerge. The third and most powerful Bakufu was founded by Tokugawa Ieyasu. After unifying Japan in the wake of the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, he was appointed shogun in 1603. The Tokugawa Shogunate, based in Edo, which is now modern-day Tokyo, would end up governing Japan for over 250 years. The Tokugawa Bakufu created a highly centralized yet stable system. The emperor remained in Kyoto as a symbolic ruler, but the shogun controlled politics, economics, and foreign relations, just like the Bakufus that preceded him. He wanted good relations with the daimyo, the smaller warlords, remember, while also ensuring that none would try to unite or overthrow the structure of the Bakufu. And I think the methods were pretty smart. The shogun required that they maintain loyalty through a system of sankin kotai, or alternate attendants. This forced warlords to rotate their presence in different domains yearly. A domain is basically where a daimyo ruled, so it would be like a small regional area. And they would have to spend every other year in Edo, the capital, and leave their families there. Under the system, they basically had to honor the shogunate and his will, or their families would be at risk of harm. The constant moving also prevented the daimyo from uniting in a particular domain over a long period of time. If they stayed in one region, perhaps, they could gather support among the people, then potentially overthrow the shogun. Also, moving is expensive, and these transportation expenses were unbelievably high. They would have these very lavish moves, and by keeping the daimyo weak financially in this manner, it empowered the shogun to pretty much keep his position. And there was also a considerable amount of peace. And with this peace came prosperity, population growth, and even the growth of a more urban culture. There was a growth of theater, woodblock prints, and a rise of a merchant class. At the same time, it was more of an isolationist country with limited contact from the outside world, only to a few carefully controlled trading posts like the Dutch and the Chinese. They had a limited degree of trade outside of Nagasaki. However, this era came to a close. By the mid-19th century, pressures from both within and outside Japan began to take a strain on the Bakufu. Western powers demanded trade and access, and one of the most famous examples is Matthew Perry from the US, who essentially said, "Open up your ports to American ships, or we will force you to open them." In an attempt to prevent the outside world from basically cracking down on them, they agreed to some of these unequal treaties, and they opened select ports for trade and gave special privileges out. At the same time, domestic critics accused the shogunates of being weak and giving in. So, in 1868, the Tokugawa Bakufu basically fell with the rise of the Meiji Restoration, redirecting imperial rule only to the emperor and ushered in a more modern Japan. And with the Meiji Restoration, the Bakufu system that dominated Japan politically for 700 years came to an end. The decades that followed saw mass industrialization and eventually militarization, and it propelled Japan in becoming a major world power, but also contribute to its aggressive expansionism and eventual defeat in the Second World War. Let's remember the Bakufu as a system that reshaped Japan's political order, giving rise to warrior rule, fostering stability, but also revealed the limits of isolation and feudal governments in a forever changing world. If you have any questions or you think I got anything wrong, because I'm definitely not an expert, please feel free to let me know in the comments or show support by subscribing or liking or doing anything to the channel. Alright, that's all. Thank you.